5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you didn't do it.
Sorry. Let's do it again.
I didn't even realize because I was looking down at the timer and not at you, and then I got to like 2, and I was like, oh.
I was like sending a text message saying that I'm doing a podcast.
That's funny. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We can't even figure out how to count up to sync in our audio today, but
Remake Rewind.
It's a bonus, not a normal episode.
Remake Rewind.
thank you for listening to Remake Rewind. Normally the podcast where we decide if remakes or reboots should have happened, but today is another bonus episode.
Boners episode.
Yep, it's another bonus episode. A few episodes back, we decided that the Fast and the Furious movie. God, that's so weird because of the naming, especially what we're going into this one. But the first of the Fast franchise, the Fast and the Furious, is essentially a knockoff of Point Break. And we had a blast fucking watching that movie, and so we decided as just a little bit of bonus content, we're going to watch the rest of the Fast films. And we are now on technically our episode 3 of the franchise, but we're covering the 4th movie, but because of timeline stuff, it's chronologically we're watching the 3rd movie, even though it's the 4th released film. So we're watching Fast and the Furious, which just removed the thes from the original title.
Yeah, I have a theory about that.
Oh, what's your theory?
I think this is a reboot of the franchise.
It is. No, it was designed to be a soft reboot of the series.
Okay, well, I didn't hear about that, so I guess I'm still a genius. I just figured it out.
But yeah, it's essentially what it is. It's bringing back some of the original characters, you know, because the second movie only had Brian, and then this movie brings back Letty, Mia, and
Sort of
Dom.
brings back Letty.
Sort of brings back Letty. Yes.
But it also feels like they reworked the characters of Brian and Dom.
They definitely did. So there's also some like weird continuity stuff, and I know like this movie and Fast 5 like throws a wrench in some of the stuff we learned in like the second movie. But this movie was designed to be a soft reboot. It was designed to get the main cast back together, and it is almost a remake or reboot of the first movie. Like the plot is essentially the same. If you were going to
reboot Fast and Furious, the Fast and the Furious, with like different actors and blah blah blah, like you're going to do a traditional reboot. I feel like this is what it would be. Like, yeah, we're going to take the same story, we'll tweak it a little bit, take the characters, tweak them a little bit,
and just use the same cast.
Yeah, except we're going to do the same cast. But yeah, it's like it is very similar to the first movie.
Yeah, the plot is almost identical. Well, it's actually more. It's like if you took the first movie, The Fast and the Furious, and merged it with Too Fast, Too Furious, because we're going up against a drug cartel again. The whole plot of this movie is essentially, instead of having one guy undercover, it's both Brian and Dom kind of going undercover, pretending to be people they're not, to infiltrate a drug cartel, just like the second movie. And this whole drug cartel, the plot of the movie is we need to get a couple of drivers to run our shipments, and then we're going to kill the drivers every time we have a new shipment, which is the plot of the second Fast and the Furious movie.
Right.
So the other thing I thought was interesting, and I want to see if you caught this, but do you notice any similarities to how this first movie starts and how this movie starts and how the first movie ends?
The first movie ends with the two of them racing the train.
So go back a little further into the first movie. So the end of the first movie really culminates in the robbery that goes bad, and they fight. You know, their whole crew is fighting a lonely truck driver with a gun.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
This movie starts with what was like essentially the final boss of the first movie, as almost to say,
yeah,
we're tougher. This isn't your daddy's Fast and the Furious movie.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a thing that screenwriters will do.
Because that's essentially what it is.
I had an issue with that because that dude died.
Which dude?
The truck driver.
No, he didn't.
And it's an iguana.
No, he didn't. They jumped out of the truck before it crashed.
I didn't see him jump out of the truck. Man.
It's like a 10-second thing where he like grabs his hat, grabs the iguana, opens the door of the truck and looks at the truck, and he like kisses the iguana and jumps out.
So another way to say that is that I was bored of this movie within the first 5 minutes. This was not a good movie.
What's funny is I enjoyed it though. It's not.
I
None of
kinda-
these movies are good movies.
Sure. But I kind of didn't enjoy this one.
Oh, interesting. I think
Yeah.
it retreads a lot, but I think from a production standpoint, I think it's put together better than the ones we've watched so far.
It felt dour and gritty for the sake of being dark. It felt like
Yeah.
Zack Snyder doing it, and
That's funny.
I just couldn't connect with it.
I can totally get that, and I think you're right because the next movie has a little bit more jokes than this one, even though the stakes are up to the next movie.
Yeah.
It is lighter. Where this one, you didn't really have. You had all the serious people in this one. So Mia is not a comic relief character. Brian has a couple of quips here and there, and most of
and
those
he's
are
a
at
much
the end.
darker. He's a much darker version of himself.
Yeah,
Like
and
he was
what's-
a SoCal surfer bro in the first two movies, and now all of a sudden he's seen some shit.
he's like married to the job.
He's like
and,
a hardened FBI
Well,
detective.
that's the thing that's weird. He's like in the FBI now, so
Yeah,
they make
like
this.
they throw it away. They're
Yeah,
just
they
like,
throw it away
yeah,
like, oh, we
let you back
reinstated
in.
you. Like,
Yeah.
but he wasn't an FBI agent before, and this is only supposed to be. We find out like halfway through the movie when he's having a moment with Mia that this is supposed to be 5 years after the original movie, and this movie released 8 years after the original movie. So already you got to kind of push some things back. We see Han. This is technically the intro to Han, but it's the second intro to Han, and Han is barely in the movie. Like, it's really weird that they brought him into this.
Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. That he's even in the beginning.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the movie, it starts with them. It's Letty, Dom, and I don't know what their characters' names are. I always just call them the brothers. They come back in the fifth movie. The brothers, and then you had Han, and they're robbing a like oil rig, like an oil tanker, like in these like treacherous mountains. And like I said, it's like them robbing the DVD players in the first movie, except this time they can fight a guy with a gun. Like it's as if to say the old stuff didn't matter.
Yeah, and also they're not just. I don't remember how they robbed it in the first one, but like they're stealing the entire tanker.
Yeah,
Which is kind of crazy.
And we've talked about it almost every episode that we've been talking about these movies, but we keep saying like they eventually become superheroes, and this movie is where most people say it really kind of kicks in. Like there's a point where Letty's using liquid nitrogen to like freeze the hitches on this like truck that's hauling 4 or 5 gas tanks.
Right.
And she's using the liquid nitrogen, and then she like beats it with the hammer, and one of the other crew with the truck with the hitch like hauls it off. There's a point where she drops the hammer, and Vin Diesel uses his muscle car as a hammer to break the last hitch off. Like, and then he has this thing where he's like pinned between the big rig and like a flaming trailer that's flying down.
Yeah,
and then
I
he
put
like
that in
drag
my
races underneath it. Like, it's superhuman reflexes and almost like bordering on like if there was an X-Men who can just control cars, Vin Diesel is that X-Men in this movie.
Yeah, he's Mack Truck Nito.
He has superpowers. There's a point where like that's the opening scene. He leaves Letty. Like Letty's like, we're ride and die. Like I knew what this was when we got in a relationship with him. He's like tough.
Dom's
and he just
like, I
fucking
guess.
he leaves her in the middle of the night.
See ya.
She then there's like we find out she dies. Like it's just exposition. Like she died. You can't see it, but Alex did quotations when I said she died because obviously she comes back because this is
So
absurd.
Let's stay on that for a second. We don't know that she's coming back in this movie. Like in this, if you take this movie on its own, or you take the franchise up to this point on its own, she's dead, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this because I have a problem with her being brought back. I actually don't really. I don't remember that bothering me in hindsight. Although revisiting the movie, maybe it will bother me. But my point is, in this movie, she's just like she dies off screen, and it's unceremonious, and she's just gone. And it's like, we haven't seen her in 3 movies. Who even cares?
Yeah, well, and then what's weird is we get her death, but almost like you've been playing the Arkham Batman games.
But he's like recreating in his mind, like he's
Right. So we get
in
this scene
Boondock
that
Saints.
moves on to his like powers exactly like Willem Dafoe's character in Boondock
There
Saints,
was a car crash.
or the Batman movies or the Batman video games where like you go to a crime scene and then
Right.
you literally can like rewind and fast forward and then you move the camera around to make sure the angles work and you basically watch the crime scene like a movie after the
absurd.
fact. Yeah,
It's
he just goes and he can smell like he just smells. He's like, oh, nitromethane. Some pussy drove this car.
Yeah, there's only one guy that drives this car in LA or whatever.
Yeah.
I almost feel like that kind of shit wouldn't fly with 2020 audiences.
No.
Like, it's a real stretch. I think it's like a real 90s thing.
It's super just like they're trying to make him Sherlock Holmes Batman of the car world. Like,
Right.
It's insane. Like they could go and do a procedural where he teams up with My Cousin Vinny and they just go across America solving car related crimes.
Listen, kids, you don't want to drink and drive. Let me recreate this car crash scenario for you. Yeah, and he's
It's
like
absurd.
he's pawing at the fucking residue on the street, and he's like, somebody used nitro
Nitromethane. It's stupid.
It was
then
stupid, man.
you said to your point that Brian O'Connor is a darker Brian O'Connor. Like this starts with him like running brick mansion style in like downtown Los Angeles chasing a perp.
Which
And-
that made me like fucking laugh too, because that guy's like shooting bullets everywhere, and Brian's out there with no backup. Like, that doesn't seem legal. It doesn't seem like the way that the FBI would want to handle that situation.
I think it's not necessarily done
Tactical.
well, but I think what it is supposed to be is throughout this movie, I think Brian has that chip on his shoulder from letting bad guys go in the past, and he's trying to prove himself. Because throughout the movie, there's points where they're like,
Is that in that scene though?
it's not, but I think you have to do a little bit of like digging and go.
I don't want to
Everybody
dig
at
in
the
a Fast and Furious movie.
everybody in the force is giving him shit. Throughout the movie they keep saying, there's a timeline. He's like, getting the bad guys all that matters. Like he's obsessed with getting the bad guy now. And I think that kind of is, he's going into putting himself in dangerous situations, because there's a point where he's chasing that guy. They end up in an apartment building. The bad guy goes and gets like on this roof and he's waiting, and Brian just kind of like figures out, he goes, there's probably a ledge out there that I can't see, but he's probably out there. So he just decides to go through a different apartment building and tackles this guy off of like conservatively a 4-story building into a sedan or station wagon or something like that. Like this is a Brian who doesn't care. And like, he's married to the job until he sees Mia again.
Yeah, which is my cat's name. So every time you say Mia, I'm like, yeah, my cat's a good girl. Yeah, I mean, I guess what it comes down to is that, like, gritty Brian didn't really do it for me.
No, and he gets a little lighter in the other movies, and, like, he is serious in all of them, but, like, towards the end of this movie, there is a moment where he starts to bro down with Vin Diesel again, where he's like, you blew up my car. You owe me a 10-second car now.
Yeah. I guess you owe me one now.
Yeah, exactly. And, like, that's, the only moment of, like, brevity we get in this film.
Yeah, and that's another thing that pissed me off about Letty's death, is that Vin Diesel is just like angry the whole movie.
He's angry, and this is stuff that I know just from like interviews with some of the other stars, and like their contracts have leaked for this movie. But we know in a Fast and the Furious movie, starting from this one, Vin Diesel was not allowed to lose a fight. Like that is in their contracts. Yeah. So in this one, he's not really putting any real physical altercations too much. There are a few scenes where he like throws people into cars pretty hard. He literally shrugs off a gunshot in this one. Like he gets shot in the back and he's just like flexes. And the only thing that you see later on is you do see when he's like taking apart a car or something, you see a couple blood drips. But he also has to have women in every single movie. Like Letty just died and he's like in the club and all these honeys are coming up. Like he's the hottest guy in the club.
And he's turning down Wonder Woman.
Yeah, he's turning down Gal Gadot, and like she's like, "Oh, are you one of those guys who likes a car more than women?" And he's like, "I appreciate a good body, no matter the make or the model."
Like, does that mean he's into dudes?
Yeah, and then I guess, which what,
which is
good
cool.
for him.
Yeah,
it's totally fine. But then she's
that'd
like,
be super progressive for the Fast and Furious franchise to admit that they're gay, because that's kind of what it's based on, like the romantic relationship, the would-be romantic relationship between Brian and Dom.
Right.
Like, let's just commit to it.
she then goes as far as saying something along the lines of like, well, tell me about the women you like. Like, you look like you want a strong woman. And he's like, she's got to have 80% devil, 20% angels, and those eyes that just cut through the bullshit. And she has to be like, want a little engine grease under her finger. She's like, that doesn't sound anything like me. And he's like,
these
it
are all
isn't.
He's just reading like, what's the word I'm looking for? He's reading like those quote stickers that you would find at like a car shop or something.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's insane. So, yeah, he turns down her, and she's like so hot for him the entire movie, like immediately.
It's a little off-putting. Like she's like desperate, and it's weird.
Yeah, because it's like the first time they meet, she's like, it's at the race where he and Paul Walker are racing for a spot to be with a drug mule driver dude, and
which is a plot point directly from 2, right?
yeah, exactly. It's literally a majority of the second movie. So he wins by side-telling Brian, creates Brian to spin out, and it causes a little conflict. So then he needs to give...
cheated.
You cheated. You can't beat me in a straight fight, you bitch. And then Dom's like, oh, I didn't realize there were any rules, you bitch. Kind of thing. Like, they're just like one-upping each other.
I love you.
So... right after he wins, immediately Giselle, played by Gal Gadot, was like, I need your thumbprint and your phone number. And he's like, looks at her and he's like, the thumbprints for Braga, the phone numbers from her. Like, just thirsty from the get-go.
I need your inseam.
Yeah. So they go on their, like, they have this almost exactly the same as Too Fast, Too Furious. They go to the club that's owned by the cartel, and they're having a great time. And the big twist of this movie is the guy that they think is like the number 2 guy goes by Campos, but he's actually Braga, the cartel drug lord.
Yeah, it's just like such a tired. They like put a lot into that twist, and it's just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, but they have this whole scene's like, wait a second, because they're just like, they're trying to badmouth each other because Brian ends up pulling something out of the first movie where like he raids the guy so he can end up taking his spot.
That was funny. The guy that likes feet.
Yeah, so Brian is now by default the second driver because he gets one of Braga's guys arrested, and they're at the club, and Dom is like, oh, so you were in jail, huh? And then he's like, do you know this guy? And Brian's like, no, I don't. Oh, aren't you wanted? That's probably not good for the thing. And then the boss guy's like, oh, you know each other, don't you? And he's like, yeah, he's fucking my sister. And everything was like, oh, you're lucky to be alive. Like, he's totally cool with this. Like, it's not a big deal.
That kind of brings me to another point, that Dom is, you know, a most wanted criminal in the United States because he's been in South and Central America this whole time, right?
Yeah.
And like, it was a big deal that he couldn't be at Letty's funeral. He had to watch from a mile away with his fucking eagle eyes or whatever.
Yeah. And Brian knew
and,
exactly where he was. Right.
He just like looked up at the oil, whatever's, and the derricks, and he was like, "Oh, I bet Dom's up there. I miss him so much." And I could feel his presence up there. My point is, Dom is like a wanted dude, and he's just like walking around the fucking city, and he's at his old house fixing up a car with the door open and shit.
Oh no, he's not at his old house. Like, he stops by to visit Mia. And then she's like, you can't be... He's somewhere else. Like, he's out in some junkyard somewhere.
But at multiple times, he's at that house.
He
fixing.
is.
They have dinner there. He knocks over a shelf.
Yeah. What's weird is, like, to your point that he's just, like, walking around. Like, there's a point where he goes after doing his little, like, crime scene investigator, and he, like, figures out that the guy has nitromethane. So he goes to this, like, one tuner dude who apparently is, like, the tuner for all the criminals. And it's like, hey, who uses nitromethane? And he's like, roughing this guy up, and the guy's like, dude, you're fucking wanted. Like, I don't have to listen to you. You're not the boss around here. You haven't been here for 5 years. And then we get this like amazing feat of strength by Vin Diesel where he like kicks a winch that drops out an engine block.
Oh yeah,
and he like catches it like the last second with like the last link of the chain.
Ridiculous.
He's just like holding up this engine block,
and
like,
it's as if the engine block as if it like is on like a hook, you know, another piece of metal. Like there's no give or anything.
Yeah.
You know, not like if a human tried to grab something heavy and it would drop a couple inches before he was able to control the weight of it. You know what I mean?
It's insane. Like, it's just like, it's vanity. And like I said, between that, him shrugging off the bullet wound, all the women just all over him the entire movie. It's just absurd.
And I don't mind the absurdity, but this movie, and I know they kind of get there in the next one, but this movie feels like the stakes are way too low to justify that level of absurdity.
Yeah, I agree.
This is essentially like it's almost like a noir. Like it's like a hard-boiled like crime mystery drama.
Them trying to find out who Braga really is.
Yeah, the two of them are like on an extra, not extra judicial, but
but they are at a
they're
point.
tracking down the clues. You know what I mean? They're like PIs, the private investigators.
Almost immediately. So we have the same kind of hurdles that we have in Too Fast, Too Furious. They put a tracker in the car, and so he has to like pull the tracker out at the last minute right before they get scanned, and his bosses are like, why is the tracker gone? Why is he turning off the tracker and everything? It's like, why do you fucking think?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, that's incredible.
Right. Well, and then they immediately, after like that first little outing, they're like, oh, we caught you on traffic cams with Vin Diesel kind of thing. Like, yeah, you know what? We're still working on this. And he goes, like, the entire movie, they're doubting him. But there's never a point where he necessarily tries to hide that he's with Vin Diesel. Like, he doesn't tell them. But as soon as they ask about him, he's like, yeah, I'm totally with Vin Diesel. And then he goes into the office the next day and was like, hey, I've got the drugs. Why don't we do a sting to get the bad guy out? And they're still like, I don't know. We don't trust you. It's like, dude,
the
if he was
deadline's
really
passed.
If he was really trying to get away and fucking help Dom, he wouldn't be coming in. He would just be telling Dom to go. But in this, he's like, he's not hiding anything. He doesn't have a card up his sleeve. He goes to his boss and say, hey, why don't me and Dom go and do this? And we give him a get out of jail free card. So it's like, it's not like he's trying to hide anything.
He's not really working against like a clock or a deadline or anything. Like the FBI are just a bunch of assholes in this movie.
Yeah.
Who just oppose him for the sake of opposing him because he needs some drama in the movie.
Exactly. Well, and then you have like this asshole cop with him the whole movie who's just like constantly undermining him, which he hasn't given him any reason in this movie to undermine him. Yeah. So it's like it's a little strange. We have like the whole
Boardwalk Empire, right?
Yeah, him. And
also his boss is like knockoff James Remar.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's like James Remar's brother. It's not, but they could totally play brothers. Yeah. So long story short, they end up using the drugs to lure Braga out, and they at the same time realize that Braga is actually Campos and that they hired an old actor they Iron Man 3'd it before Iron Man 3. And they end up going through the tunnels in Mexico and getting people, and like
I didn't like all the tunnels, man.
It was super CG. Yeah, it was a little weird.
It didn't look good, and it also was like there are these tunnels that go under the border so they can sneak the drugs, right? Yeah. But the movie sort of implies that the only way to get through the tunnels is to drive 100 miles an hour. Like you have to be going
because of the cameras. Yeah. Or the
there's not cameras.
There's cameras on either side of the thing, so it's like you have to like that was a big thing in the middle. Is they if you don't drive exact pinpoints, you can set up you can ping a heat detector, and then the heat detectors have a certain amount of time before the camera will reposition it to either side of the tunnel. So they actually had to race repositioning of the cameras. So it's like, yeah, if you don't go super fast, you'll be caught on one of the cameras somewhere. It's silly.
Yeah, it was silly. And there's a thing with the helicopter during that part too that was not very clear to me.
Yeah, it didn't make any sense because like, oh, we're gonna get the helicopter for confirmation, but they're underground, so of course the helicopter never saw them, and they're like, oh, now we need cars and ground patrols to guarantee that. It's like, well, why didn't you just send the ground patrol in the first place? Yeah,
the whole thing
I don't know.
Silly.
It didn't make any sense.
The tunnels, I'm assuming on both sides, but on both sides are constantly being. You have to drive through like a facade to get into the tunnel.
Well, no, they just did that the last time. There was like a little garage door when they.
Oh yeah, you're right. On the one side, it was just kind of like there's like an overhang or something. It was sort of hidden. But then on the other side, and I think within the tunnel, there was like these wood things that they drove through.
Yeah, it made no sense. Like what was frustrating about the end of the movie, because I think, especially when you move on to the later movies, so 5, 6, 7, 8, you just get these like crazy over the top set pieces. But the big set piece in this one is them basically driving in straight lines through a tunnel, and you just kind of see them jerking left and right, to shift lanes in the tunnel. But you had this like really great street race when they're doing their tryouts. Like I honestly think so far it was some of the best driving, the most interesting driving was when they were racing the two other guys to get the spot on Braga's team, and they had like the GPS on the route, and they did some interesting things. Like obviously they were driving, there were a lot more cars, it looked more, it was real because they were actually driving, it was a little more visceral, and there were certain points where they were on different routes, and so you had like elevation, so you were seeing Brian on one street that was a higher elevation than them on the other street, and there's some really interesting shots and camera work in a legitimately engaging action scene for the end of the movie just to be them essentially driving in a straight line for 20 minutes.
Yeah. I agree. My favorite part of that street race is Dom going, "Still Buster."
Yeah, what was funny is like you have Brian once again trying to act like he is a better driver than everyone. He's like, "Oh, too soon, Dom," and then he uses his nitro, and then he gets scolded, and it's like, "It's not fair. You cheated."
It's not
like, dude,
fair.
You're lucky he was able to, because he's such a car like controller, that he caused you when you're going almost 100 miles an hour on a like Santa Monica Boulevard, that he conveniently made you just spin out in a perfect control in the middle of the lane where everybody else you guys were racing against fucking died. Like You're lucky. If you didn't know, if you weren't banging his sister, he would have killed you.
And that's another thing. Like, I mean, the guys racing, whatever. I don't care if they die, but there's a few accidents in there with like civilians where they definitely.
Oh yeah,
died. A lot
there
of cars.
were several
over.
civilians would have died in this.
And that like makes me feel like Dom and Brian like aren't great guys. Like it makes it hard to root for those dudes, and we're supposed to be rooting for them a little bit.
Yeah,
like I know they're criminals, but they're supposed to have kind of a code, and they're just like, yeah, you just like massacred people, indeterminately, whatever.
Yeah. Several people died. Like I think what they always do is they make a point that the accidents they cause, you never see, like that's always like fender benders or cars spin out, where it's the accidents that the bad guys quote unquote cause, that the ones that are gnarly. But they're still, if they weren't racing these people, if they weren't being aggressive, slamming these bad guys, it's absurd.
Yeah. Also, the GPS had images, like the four racers are using GPS given to them by, what's the guy's name? Braga. And the GPS has images of their cars. Like, it's super advanced. It's not the way the GPS works in the world.
This movie, because it was the big one where they pumped a lot more money into it, they also had release of arcade games that came out around the same time that were called Fast and the Furious. I remember playing this game a lot at some like pizza place near wherever I was when this movie came out. I remember a pizza place near me had it, and I would go for lunch and I play the game a couple of times. So they had like the same images of like the girls, like in the arcade games from like the late 90s, early 2000s, where they would have like actual people, like Area 51, like actual people would pop up in the game. They had that kind of thing too, where there were like photos of girls where they were going through and doing like the flag waving to start the game. So they had virtual bikini models doing the flag waving to start the game.
I'm into that. I played that game.
It was a little weird.
I have a question.
I have an answer, maybe.
So the bad guy's name is Phoenix, right?
Phoenix is the one who's like the henchman, the actual number 2, who's presented as number 3, who killed Letty. Yeah,
with air quotes. Why does that dude have a hammer and sickle tattooed on his neck?
I don't know.
Is he like a communist, or he's not Russian?
Maybe he's
from
from like.
Appear to be Russian.
Maybe he's from Cuba or Venezuela or something. I don't know.
Are communists like super into drag racing?
Yes.
Okay. Where did they get the cars?
I have no idea.
Do they all share one car?
I don't know, dude. So yeah, I mean, what's insane is, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more when we get to the 6th movie where Letty comes back. But when you watch the scene of her accident and you watch this guy shoot her in the face at point blank, it's kind of like.
But that's not really happening because that's what Dom recreated in his mind from that.
Right. Well, no, but you do.
It's a dream sequence.
But you have Braga go and say, "This is what happened." Not Braga, but like Phoenix is like. At one point, the first time they run the drugs, they realize, oh, we're gonna get killed. So Dom just knew this was gonna happen somehow, based off nothing. They haven't given them any indication that they were gonna kill him. They've been nothing but cordial to them. But Dom's like, oh, they're gonna fucking kill us. So he like lets the NOS out of his tank and then does the little old school thing from like the 70s where you put the cigarette adapter thing in the car and it blows up all the cars. Yeah, it blows up every single car, and then between him,
because that's how that works.
him and Brian are able to like take on like 20 dudes, no problem, other than Dom getting shot once, and he just literally like shrugs it off like he's the Hulk.
I think
But
there's a scene where he actually flexes and the bullet pops out.
Yeah, yeah. So he, at that point, he like talks to Phoenix. He's like, "I'm actually not a drug dealer, mule guy. I'm actually here to stop you because you killed my girlfriend. Her name was Letty." And then Phoenix is like, "I totally killed Letty. I shot her in the fucking face."
And that's also, sorry, I'm like digressing from your point a little bit, but he times that perfectly so that Phoenix is like about to shoot him, and then the car bomb goes off, which there's no way that he could know that.
Yeah. It's stupid. He's the car whisperer. He's Carnito or whatever we called him earlier.
Yeah, Mac Chucknito.
Mac Chucknito. There you go. But
yeah, it's ridiculous. Okay, but we're talking about Letty. So yeah, he admits to shooting Letty. Another thing that bothered me about that is that Dom and Brian get into a fight because Brian knew that Letty went to the FBI. Oh, and this is another note I wrote down. When they're fighting, instead of doing, it's kind of like the Batman Superman thing where he's like, "Martha, why are you saying that name?" And Brian is like, "She did it for you, Dom. She did it for you."
and then he's like, well, then
And
Dom finally like, storms off, and then Brian Jones like, "I'm sorry, Dom." Like he just screams like part of like crying like, "I'm sorry," and he like does this little thing where they're like, "Ah, shucks," and like punches the air in front of him. He's just like, "I'm sorry."
They should have had him
so
firing
weird.
a gun in the air and screaming
Ah.
whilst screaming.
Yeah, they-
But my point is, Brian knows about Letty, and then they don't really revisit that, right? Like Brian
No.
should know more about what happened to Letty. Like Brian would have seen the body, right?
Yeah,
And-
that's what
and they
doesn't make
don't-
sense. It
and they don't
was
really-
his informant.
Yeah,
There's no
Like,
way
if-
he doesn't get to see the body.
Yeah, if she was shot in the head, he would know about it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So it's confusing. It's just like it's a loose end, and it's not clear.
Yeah. Well, this movie did make me pumped because I did see this one in the theater. So I saw all of them but the first two in theaters. And I remember liking this one. I do remember, oh, this is a little dark. I didn't think it was great, but I remember like, you know what, this was a good way of revamping the franchise. But I'm really excited to get into the fifth one because the fifth and the sixth are my favorite too. So I'm really excited to get into these more fun, over the top ones.
Yeah, same. I've done this once before where I watched the whole franchise. I mean, I saw one in I think in the theaters when it came out, and I probably saw two at some point. But I've gone through this franchise once before, and I remember having this exact same feeling where I was like, all right, one was pretty fun. It's of its time, but it's got some magic there. And then two I don't remember what I thought about three, but I remember thinking two was like whatever, three is kind of whatever. Four is a noticeable change, and then five is where it really gets fun.
5 is where they really decide this is where the series is going to be now. So I'm really excited to get into that one because
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I'm really excited to get into that one in a couple of weeks because that's when we get the new formula where we get the cast and crew that are with us for the rest of the movies. So
That's when Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson comes in. And he's
we
like,
get
"Listen,
Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in.
Let me
That's
show
when
you
we
guys how to
unfortunately
make action."
that's why, unfortunately, we get Tyrese in the rest of the movies going forward. But we also get Ludacris, who I think is great. We get Han for a couple of films. So we get some great moments coming up with the characters that were side characters.
Yeah. Remind me where Tokyo Drift takes place in the timeline of all this.
So it goes 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, Tokyo Drift 7.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Do you remember the part where Phoenix? I keep on wanting to call him Phoenix TX because that's the name of a punk band, sort of. He goes, "You looked under my hood," and he's so offended.
Yeah, it's dumb. But even this movie feels dated at this point, but it definitely put the bones
especially because
into
the version that we watched of it was the standard definition, so it looks super dated.
Yeah. It's the digital copy that came with it. I think the digital copies for like all these movies before 7 are standard.
Ruh-roh.
Yeah.
I
Although
might
watch
need HD for 5.
because you're watching on Vudu.
Yeah.
I'm watching them on Apple TV because I have movies anywhere.
Oh,
I think
that's
Apple
interesting.
TV automatically upgrades them to HD.
Interesting. Okay.
So I've been watching on Apple TV and they are much gooder. But anyway,
Yeah.
that was a bonus episode. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with a regular episode, and we're going to be talking about Mulan, so that should be good.
Mulan.
Ooh,
I also wanted to ask you why Dom always pops wheelies with his cars, though.
because it's cool.
He does it so much.
It's a
And it's
car erection. That's like him getting an
Why-
erection and showing it
Yeah.
on screen.
You're 100% right. Film theory, yes. If
Because he only does it at like very dramatic moments.
why doesn't everybody do that? Like, why aren't there
Because
more?
it's terrible for your car to have it slamming fucking down at 100
Yeah,
miles
but
an hour.
Dom is the best. So, like, if he can do it, why can't other people?
Because you have to have that American muscle.
There's other American muscles.
No, there's not.
There's
There's
other
only
people trying
Dom.
American muscles. All
There's
right.
only Dom. But yep, that's
Well.
that's the episode. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you.